Are you living your life or managing your career on other people's terms? Too often, we prioritize other people's needs over our own. And while this might work temporarily, it never ends well. This week, I talked with Jen Schwytzer, life coach and founder of KINDfulness Coaching, about her journey from social worker in a hospital setting to coaching others to manage stress and overwhelm. Jen shares how putting herself last led to burnout and loss of love for the work she did, and how changing her career empowered her to prioritize herself and her family. We also explore steps you can take to start putting yourself first, even if it feels scary and uncomfortable to do so. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Jen. I am so looking forward to this conversation, and I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim, for having me. I really appreciate it. My name's Jen, and I am a social worker and a coach, and I founded my own company called KINDfulness Coaching. It's all about being kind to yourself. I think a lot of times I say we as in women, are putting ourselves last and not always taking care of ourselves and struggling with overwhelm. And those are things that I focus on. And I transitioned my career from social work to coaching about 2 years ago. After I went through some of my own anxiety, stress, and burnout. And that led me into some personal development and into the coaching world. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really grateful that you're here. And if you're open to it, would you be willing to share just a little bit more about your own personal journey? Because I think that that's probably similar to what a lot of people are experiencing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I think that a lot of people had like life transitions during COVID. And that was for me very much what happened as well. I've been a social worker for about 18 years, and I worked a lot in the medical and mental health fields, just doing a lot all the time. And I found myself very much going through the motions every day, just kind of sticking to the rules, playing by everyone else's kind of terms, and really found myself in a place where I wasn't enjoying what I was doing as much. And I just felt like there was something missing, something that was just not there for me. I lost the love of what I was supposed to love. And for me, that it kind of sparked a turning point for me where I tried to figure out, okay, what is missing? What do I need? What's going to make me happy and bring me joy? And so, I went through the doubts and the burnout and the just feeling like something was missing. It's hard to put a word on it, but it's just like that feeling that something's supposed to be there that's not there. And I think as women, we oftentimes experience that because we are putting everyone else first and always on the back burner, and not always, identifying what it is that isn't there for us.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I love so much of what you said about sticking to the rules and playing on other people's terms, because I think that's a very common for so many of us for a number of reasons. I think partly or maybe mostly because of the way we're socialized, right? We're
Yeah.
conditioned to be obedient as children, to follow the rules. We're not encouraged to color outside the lines. And so
Right.
we're always trying to do our best and make everybody else happy. And then on top of that, when you describe being a social worker where you're taking care of others, there's also that responsibility in your case, very directly, but in many people's cases, it's like, I have a responsibility to others. And
Yep.
so we're giving and giving and giving and not necessarily recognizing once that well has run dry, right? Like something's got to be.
Yeah. And oftentimes you don't realize until you're like in the moment. You're never like, oh, this is coming and I should be prepared for it. You're always like, oh shoot, this is here. I'm struggling now. But I do think like that idea, I'm somebody who, I thought coaching was really good for me because I'm somebody who likes to challenge. I like to challenge people. I like to challenge myself and push outside of comfort zones. And when you're in the corporate world or you're in a company or an agency where, there might be some strict guidelines or rules, like that's like frowned upon. And so, it was hard for me to feel like I couldn't be challenged and, stay in my own box and do what I'm supposed to do. Like for me, that just wasn't me. And I felt like I was kind of stuck.
Yeah. And when you talk about the missing piece, which I think is so important and something that when we have experienced it, we know it. We maybe can't put our finger on it, but we know it.
Yeah.
How do you know whether, and maybe this is a question that would be hard to answer, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are. How do you know if that is a reflection of a problem that means you have to change something bigger, or that it's just a phase, right? Like I think it's so scary to think about making a change. And so it's so hard to come to terms with that place of like, okay, I've reached the end of the road where I am.
Yeah, I think that for me, once I recognized that it was impacting my happiness, for me, it was like, okay, I'm ready to make that change. So maybe it doesn't impact so many other things down the road, but I need to make this change for me. And I'm recognizing that something isn't there or something isn't right. And I want to make that change because I'm ready to feel like a little bit different or a little bit happier or bring back more things that bring me joy. And so for me, it was very much like, I'm ready to make that change for me.
And as you're saying that, it's making me think about personal relationships, right? Like we've all been in a romantic relationship. Well, most of us at some point have been in a romantic relationship where we're like, yeah, there's something missing here, but we're afraid to let it go because what if there isn't something better on the other side? And so some of it, I think, is having faith that there is more than what you're experiencing right now.
Yeah. And that's such a good point too. And I'll tell a lot of people, like, I think trusting your gut is sometimes one of the most like decisive pieces of information you can have because and there's like, I don't even know if there's scientific information on it or not, but I feel like, a lot of times you might not be able to pinpoint, but your gut is telling you like something's not there or something's wrong or something could be different. And so to kind of trust your gut and recognize like, you know what, maybe grass isn't greener on the other side, but I know that I have the ability to control something about this that doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that trusting your gut, because one thing that I have found myself working on over the years, because I've had a lifelong anxiety disorder, is knowing the difference between when it's my gut talking and when it's my fight or flight response kicking.
Yes. And it's such a good point because when we struggle with anxiety, it's like our brain is telling us so many different things. And it's like, oh gosh, what do I listen to? What do I try and shut out? And, what do I run from? And what do I, fly to? And it's so hard to kind of calm those voices. And I think sometimes just like that self-talk that you do with yourself, like, okay, let me think through this rationally. Let me think about the facts in this situation. What do I know to be true? And how can I formulate that best action item moving forward. And sometimes it's just about talking yourself through some of those hard moments, because we're our best cheerleader, we're our best advocate, and we have a lot to say.
I like that. You're right. And I have certainly found that to be helpful too. If you stay in that place of the sky is falling and everything is, going to go wrong, that there isn't a way to problem solve from there.
Mhm.
And so to really take it out to the level of what's the action? What's
Yeah.
the thing I can do? What's the thing I can control?
Yep.
So that it brings you into a more empowered place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a model that I use a lot. It's from the life coach school, and it talks about how your feelings and your thoughts really impact the results that you have. And so going to like starting to think about the results that you want and changing your thoughts and feelings to ensure that you get the desired outcome. And so, I think that very much goes back to what we're telling ourselves and the messages that we're giving and how we can control our thoughts and feelings to make sure that we get the results that we want. It just takes time and practice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm curious, going back to your story, was there a defining moment for you, or was it kind of a slow burn and you just were, how did it
Yeah.
actually, how did you get to the point where like, okay, I'm out?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's an interesting story, that's for sure. So, I'm working in the hospital field for, like I said, almost 17 years of my career. And actually during COVID, my husband had a pretty critical medical issue that brought him into the hospital for some time. And during that time, I felt, and I don't know if it was there or not, but I felt a lot of pressure towards my employer to return or make sure like loose ends were tied up. And at that moment for me, it was like, this is not important to me. What's important to me is my husband, our family, and taking care of that first. And so for me, it was very much that it was a reprioritization for me. Like I was like, my work does not define me. My family defines me, and I have to figure out how to put that back at the forefront. And so that moment for me, I found myself doing a lot of personal development because I recognized that I hadn't been taking care of myself. And without taking care of me, I could not help my husband through a pretty significant time in our relationship and our marriage. And so I wanted to be stronger for our family. And so that kind of led me into my coaching. I remember the day he got out of the hospital and I said, I've been doing a lot of work on me and I really want to be a life coach. And he was like, okay, like, let's do it. And what does that mean?
Oh, that's great though, that he was immediately supportive.
Yeah.
So what's different now? How's your life different at this point than it was back then?
My family comes first, and that is first and foremost what is important to me. I have worked really hard to provide a balance that works for me. And, when we think about work-life balance, it's different for everybody. So when I think about work-life balance, it's, I can get our little guy on and off the bus every day. I can make sure I just volunteered this afternoon at his book fair. And so for me, it's about making sure that what's the most important to me comes first. And in all of that, I'm taking care of me. So I'm trying to live the healthiest lifestyle that I can. I'm not always great at it, and I don't always make the best choices, but I know getting outside and getting some fresh air it means the world to me. And I know that walking my dog is important. And some days the gym happens and some days it doesn't, and I'm okay with that. I don't live on somebody else's terms. I create my own priorities, and I work around what's most important to me and still continue to make a living that supports me and my family. So that's kind of the shift for me, is taking care of me so that I can help take care of my family best.
And I feel like that's the ideal situation, is not being on somebody else's terms, right? And I love that you say, don't always do it perfectly because that's really important. just being even in a position to be more intentional around the choices that you make. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is not everyone's going to do what we did and go out and start our own businesses, right? So when we think about it in the context of people who are continuing to work in organizations where they have a boss and they have a team that's demanding their attention, what are some of the things you think about in terms of like incrementally helping people move in this direction?
Yeah. So, I still, and I agree. I just had a conversation with someone earlier today. It's like, well, things are going bad. It doesn't mean you can just quit your job. It's like, okay, we have to figure out how to make this work for you. And so it's working around an already busy schedule. Like, so maybe identifying small gaps in the day where you can, take your lunch outside or, take a little walk around the building that you're in, making sure that you're prioritizing what's important to you. For me, that was very much like health and fitness and, those pieces. So if that's important for somebody else, figuring out how to incorporate that into your already busy day. How can I make this work for me in the schedule that I have? And then I think the biggest thing is looking at, your confidence and building that confidence so that you can set healthy boundaries in your life, in your career, with your time, with the people that you surround yourself with. That is probably one of the biggest things I work with is boundaries. And how do you bring in the energy you want to reflect? And how do you surround yourself with those people that are going to support you in your day to day and uplift you when you're having a bad day, or just like, vent with you when you need a vent session? Like, how do you find those people and how do you attract that energy that you're looking for? And I think boundaries is a big part of that.
Can we talk a little bit more about boundary setting? Because I think that is something that is so hard. I feel like and I would add myself to this group. There are so many people out there who are like, yeah, I know I should be doing that, but I'm not doing it. And I'm not doing it for a reason. Right? And so I think part of it is that we make assumptions about what will happen to us or to our relationships if we start doing that. And so I wonder what's like the first step?
Yeah, I think those are really, really good points. And that's why too, I mentioned confidence, because we need the confidence to like, no, we have to stop those spiraling anxious thoughts about the assumptions that we're making and think back and do that self-talk of, is this something that's going to be helpful to me? Is this what I want to do? And to have the confidence that we are making the best decision for us in the moment. And so I think confidence is a huge part of that. And, sometimes those assumptions are true. So I don't want to say like, get away from those assumptions, because sometimes you're going to set boundaries and people aren't going to like them. And you could have a falling out and that might happen. So I don't want to say get rid of the assumptions, because it's a valid concern. But I think, that confidence goes so, so far. We all get into that people pleasing mentality where we want to make everybody happy. And again, that's putting us on the back burner. What's making us happy? What is it that we want for ourselves? And, I tell a lot of my clients that it's okay to be selfish. It's something that we have a really hard time doing. And to think about like, okay, if I set this boundary, what am I getting in return? What am I getting for me? And so just to think about like the ability to be selfish in moments is okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point too, because I am a big believer in finding the intersection between someone else's needs and your own. And I think that when you talk about not setting boundaries or, just sort of giving and not getting anything in return all the time, if you really do stop and objectively think about that, like why would everyone else's needs be more important than yours, right? Like, and
Yeah,
if you just sort of think about that logically, it
I
doesn't
know.
make sense. But I think we're so afraid of upsetting other people or
Mm.
damaging the relationship in some way. And so I think it's not about suddenly going from people pleaser to steamroller.
Right.
It's
Then
about
people might be very like, whoa, I'm gonna stay away.
exactly. And unfortunately, I think that's what tends to happen is if you deny your own needs for so long, eventually you just break down and
Ah,
right. But instead it's about, okay, how can I meet your needs and my own at the same
yes. Yes, and I love that. And the idea of yes, I can do that and or yes, I can help you with that, but maybe it's after, I do this this or this. Or, it's thinking about ways to still be obviously a good friend, a good colleague and, you know, not to put all your work off on somebody else, but to figure out like am I meeting my own needs in the meantime or am I saying yes to something and then all of the stuff that I was supposed to do or family time or my own to-do list that's getting thrown to the back burner and then that's creating that stress and anxiety and you know mostly probably going to lead to that burnout stage which is where we don't want anybody to be.
yeah. And I'm also thinking as you're talking about how oftentimes we don't even clarify what the other person's expectations are. We just
Yeah,
assume that they want it yesterday and that
right.
we have to drop everything and prioritize. And
Yeah,
before even doing anything, it's worth stopping and getting a sense of what is this other person actually
right.
asking?
Right. And, an analogy I like to use is like when somebody texts you and they're like, hey, can you, go out to dinner tomorrow? You don't do an automatic text back. You stop and you think, okay, what is on my schedule tomorrow? Let me look at my schedule. Does this fit in with what I'm doing? If somebody asks you something at work, like that's okay to do. Like the idea of, oh, that's, a great idea. Let me get back to you. Let me check out my schedule. Let me check out, even if it's just a moment for you to process, like okay, if I say yes to this, what might I be saying no to? Or is there something that might be getting pushed, behind because I'm agreeing to help in another way? So just the idea of taking that step back and pausing before you automatically respond is so important.
I think that should be rule number one. It's like never say yes immediately
Yes.
because then
Yes,
you're not coming from a place of intention. You're coming from a place of reflex.
exactly. Exactly. I love that saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like reasonable people, and it's not to suggest that there aren't unreasonable people around us, but reasonable people will be perfectly fine with us
Yes.
saying, I want to make sure that if I commit to this, that I can
Yeah.
deliver on what I'm committing to. So let me take
Right.
a moment to evaluate how that fits into my
Right.
schedule.
And you want to be able to provide and produce like really quality work. And if you're saying yes and like, oh shoot, like how am I gonna, fit this in? And I feel like I'm gonna have to rush through this to get it done. Like you're probably not producing the quality work that you want to be putting out there. So thinking about that as well, like, what does this mean for me and my professionalism? Like, am I compromising anything here?
Yeah, exactly. Because if you say, that's how I think about it too. It's like if you say yes too often, eventually the system breaks. Eventually,
Right.
you either end up burning out or you start making mistakes because you just can't handle it. You reach the point
Right.
where it's no longer
Yeah.
sustainable.
Yeah, I used to be one of those employees too that, I would think like, okay, the place is going to burn down if I'm not here. Like nobody can do the work that I'm doing and I'm so important. No, like the place will be okay and people will fill in and your job will still be there and to think that I think someone once told me like you are not that important and I was like ooh and then I was like well yeah you're probably right.
I know it's true. It's kind of humbling, but at the same time, it's liberating to think
Yeah,
they'll figure it out. If I
right.
if I can't be here, they're gonna find a way to make it happen.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that's sometimes a hard pill to swallow because you want to think you're like, like not replaceable. And, but we probably are.
That's right. And I also think that if we do some of this incrementally, chances are people aren't even going to notice.
You're so right. Because I think sometimes people ask or say things and they're expecting you to say no, or they're expecting like, and you're like, oh, well, I have to say yes. But they're like, oh, wow. Yeah, you can do that. I figured you were so busy. So yes, I think that, the expectation that we put on other people, like you were saying, like we don't even know what their expectations are. And to, one, clarify that and think about, if I take small steps to start to improve some of these things, like things could actually look a lot different for me. And I might find a little bit more of that balance. It's been almost 2.5 years since I started, my own personal development stuff. And I'm still trying to figure things out. I'm still testing out some things. So, it's not a quick change. It's, trial and error, unfortunately. It's just that you're going to find what works for you, and what works for some isn't going to work for others. And you find ways to just kind of increase that confidence and joy and happiness in your life.
Yeah. And I like the trial and error piece because I do think that it is an experiment. And I think if
Yeah.
we think of it as an experiment, it relieves some of the pressure because we are, especially those of us who are perfectionists too. It's like we want to
Yeah.
do it perfectly all the time. But if we can just say, I'm just going to, what would happen if, right? What would happen if I said no? And I'm just
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah, and thinking about what's the worst case scenario here, But I think it's just so like it's our own like kind of reflection on that. And I love the word you use, that perfectionism. Like, well, I have to get it right, and I have to figure out, well, what works for her, that should work for me. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't, everyone's very different, and that's the important part of like what are your strengths, like what's already working for you, and how do we like build on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also thinking, going back to what you were talking about, of eventually reaching the point where you decided this is not the right place for me anymore, is that when you start setting boundaries or taking care of yourself, let's say, standing up for yourself, that if the response to that is consistently negative, I think of it as data, right? It's data that tells you, okay, maybe this isn't the right place for me. Maybe this isn't a place where I can be my best self and do my
Yep.
best.
Absolutely. And I think that you have to give yourself the opportunity to try. I think that a lot of people just like, are like, okay, this isn't working, but they haven't taken these little steps to see like, okay, let me change how I'm kind of interacting, and let me change how I'm viewing this situation to see if I can make it better. And so I think that you giving yourself that opportunity to see what you can do on your own, because we have the ability to, do really great work in an environment that's going to support like really great professionals.
Yeah. And if you're not doing the work, you're likely just going to repeat the pattern everywhere.
Yeah. And that's like, those people that are like, well, this workplace stunk and this workplace, well, at some point you're going to have to like look back and be like, whoa, was it me?
That's right. What's the common denominator there?
Right, right. And you've got to put in the work. And if you put in the work and you're like, this still isn't working, like you feel like you've at least given it a fair shot, and you've given it everything you had to try and make it work.
Exactly. And you also develop skills that you can take with you wherever you go next.
Yeah, absolutely. Like thinking about what you learned and what you gained, like, you might have gained the ability to like handle conflict or have difficult conversations. And those are all things that you're going to need later in life anyways.
That's right. That's right. They will serve you well no matter where you are.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you talk to your clients about that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, so I really focus on the ability to be kind to yourself. And I know throughout this conversation, we've kind of hinted at it a little bit and talked about it, but I think it's so crucial, like the ability to be kind to yourself, take care of you. Like it really does have that domino effect on all of your life, your relationships, your career. Like it has to start with you. And I think that just putting that out there, and I think that people who want coaching that come to me that aren't quite ready, like you can tell those people that are like ready to jump in and they're like, here's what's going on. I want to like work on this, this, and this. And I'm like, yes, let's do it. And then you have other people that come in that are like, all of this around me is making me do the crazy things that I'm doing. And I'm like, well, let's kind of look at you and look inside and see what's going on there. So I just, the idea to reiterate is it all starts with us. And, we are always the last on our lists. We're taking care of everyone else. And to just put yourself at the top of that list and be selfish, like I can't reiterate that enough. We also work a lot on gratitude. Finding ways to appreciate ourselves, appreciate others. Anytime you do something nice for somebody, it always makes us feel good. And I think people sometimes forget that. So the idea of just like putting kindness out there, putting like, your best foot forward. And, obviously we're all going to have bad days and that's okay. And, but the idea of just making yourself a priority and giving and taking that gratitude that comes, I think is so, so important.
And what I really like about that too is that it teaches you to pay attention to the positive, because our brains are so oriented towards the negative that
Yeah.
focusing on gratitude is such a powerful way to just balance our perspective of ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at to-do lists, being in that perfectionist mode, wanting everything to be great and perfect, we're like, here's what I didn't do, and here's what I didn't get to today. And the idea of just turning that around and being like, wow, I actually completed 6 of the 10 things on my to-do list. And you're not focusing on the 4 you didn't complete. You're focusing on what you did complete, and just, praising yourself a little bit and be like, wow, I killed it today. Like I had all of these interruptions and I actually, I got all of this done. And so just that idea of coming from that perspective, it can really shift your mindset.
Absolutely. It's so important too when you're building confidence and you're trying to make changes to focus on what are the positive results. And so I think even just like we've been talking about setting small, taking baby steps, even when it comes to setting boundaries, celebrate that, because that's a big victory and it's really worth paying attention to.
It totally is. And we don't pay enough attention to it. And, I think that's the idea of like, we're our biggest cheerleaders or we're our biggest critics. So you get either side and whatever day it happens to be for you.
That's exactly right. This has been so helpful, Jen. I so appreciate this conversation. For people who want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at KINDfulnessCoaching.com, or you can find me on Instagram at KINDfulness Coaching.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it. I love the emphasis on kindness. I think we could all use more of that these days.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me, Kim. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.